Do you know me? I directed Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, and She-Devils on Wheels. My name is Herschell Gordon Lewis, and if you know what's good for you, you'll listen to Shuffle Function on the Maverick Radio Network.
Your sister tomorrow night. Let's liven up this dead room. There's light in the old boy yet. It's fun and games time in the bedroom. Suburban roulette. Suburban roulette. Her husband's just a grouch, dear. My wife's a hopeless square. There they are on the couch, dear, and they're just sitting there. Let me borrow your comb, love. It's nearly 6 a.m., my pet. Your husband will soon be home, love. Suburban roulette. Suburban roulette.
The theme from, if you've never seen it before, you're going to have quite an introduction tonight to the world of Herschell Gordon Lewis. That was the theme to Suburban Roulette on 89.7 The Maverick. Good evening, everybody. This is Shuffle Function. I'm Shy Boy Tim.
And my name is Shelley, and this is a dream come true show that we are about to air for you guys.
It is.
More so for, I'm not saying that you put in more time with Herschell Gordon Lewis than I have. I'm a relatively newer convert compared to the decades that you've been playing around with Herschell Gordon Lewis.
It has been decades.
Movies.
I've been a Herschell Gordon Lewis fanatic since high school, when I picked up used copies of the big VHS box Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs cassettes at Belmar Video all those years ago. And I just sort of never looked back. Now, if you don't know Herschell Gordon Lewis, you kind of have a hint to who he is by mentioning Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs. He's today he has a pretty amazing career as an expert in direct marketing, direct mail, and copywriting.
An author,
a best-selling author in that field. But we first were introduced to Herschell Gordon Lewis through his films, and he has played. He's done a lot of different films throughout the years. He's done biker movies and psychic films and hillbilly. Gothic, I don't know what Gothic's the right word, but just very diverse genres in his career.
Drive-in movies.
Drive-in movies would be a good blanket term for it. But the most notable historic contribution that Herschell Gordon Lewis has made in films is that he was the creator of the splatter movie. When you see movies today, horror movies today, that are just like buckets of blood and entrails, well, there was a guy that had to do that first, and Herschell Gordon Lewis was that guy. And I can't even begin to tell you. When we first started this show, we were like, oh, we should get station IDs from people. And I remember contacting Herschell Gordon Lewis to see if we could get a station ID. And at that time, he said, well, sure, you can give me a call and we can record this over the phone. I'm like, oh, there's no way I could.
That's not what Shy Boy Tim does.
There was no way I could have done that.
Help.
I was too freaked out to even get emails from Herschell Gordon Lewis because I'm such a big fan. So I sent him a cassette. He recorded some station IDs that we've been playing ever since for like the last 10 years.
You heard one at the top of the show.
Exactly. And, I don't know what to... I am a fanboy, and I think that's going to come out in this interview that we're going to be airing tonight. It's an evening with Herschell Gordon Lewis, man that I tell you, his voice. After we did the interview, I was telling to Shelley as we were walking out of the station that his voice is iconic to me as John Wayne is to a lot of people.
Yeah, you can't miss it. I mean, and he was such a treat to speak with.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for you guys to hear this interview this evening.
We're going to talk about his career. We're going to talk about his latest movie, The Uh-Oh Show.
And points in between.
We're all over the place, and it's a lot of fun. So let's just get started. Ladies and gentlemen, the incredible Herschell Gordon Lewis on 89.7 The Maverick. When you started out early in your professional career, you were a teacher and you worked in advertising, correct?
That's correct. I started teaching English literature at Mississippi State, which I know is an odd way to get backhandedly into the motion picture industry. My specialty was English poetry of the Victorian era. And I felt that I would spend my entire lifetime without ever having to dig into a second set of lecture notes. Robert Browning is not about to write any more poetry. So it's a very good, quiet, and serene life and with a certain amount of security to it. But over a period of time, one begins to wonder what else might there be out there that could be not just more exciting, but more remunerative. And yes, I really almost defaulted into the advertising world. And it's too long a story to bore listeners with, but I will condense it to this extent. I wound up in Chicago as the television director of a medium-sized advertising agency. And we were shooting commercials at a little film studio on Wabash Avenue, and the fellow who owned that studio made it very clear that he was desperate to get a partner. He had hands of gold on the camera, but he had no business sense that made sense, which is why we were shooting our commercials there. So in a moment of insanity, I should say in one of my many moments of insanity, I bought a half interest in that studio. The studio had been called Alexander and Associates. My partner's name was Martin Schmidhofer. Lewis and Schmidhofer would not have fit on the building, so we called it Lewis and Martin Films. And what Marty Schmidhofer did was teach me every possible technical trick for operating a camera, which has been really a major factor up until the show, which we shot digitally. One milestone, might even be called millstone, occurred when I realized that the major advertising agencies were going to California to shoot their commercials because the California studios had 35 millimeter movie equipment. All we had was 16 millimeter. So in another burst of insanity, I bought 35 millimeter movie equipment, and the major studios still went to California. Major agencies still went to California to shoot their commercials. Now what? And one day, I was really complaining, which was my lifestyle at the time, to a fellow I barely knew. This is really funny, too, because ancient Greek drama had a device called Deus ex machina, God from machine.
That's right.
And when Aristophanes or Aeschylus or somebody would write himself into a corner, the plot solution was to have a god come down in a basket and just dictate the plot lines or solve all the problems. My Deus ex machina turned out to be a fellow I was playing tennis with. There have been a number of these people in my lifetime. And he said, how do you make any money in the movie business? And I said, the only way to make money is to shoot features. He said, well, why don't you shoot features? Which is like saying, why aren't you rich? As though you have a great deal of control over things like that. That planted a very nasty seed. And I said, well, nobody shoots features in Chicago. And he said, nonsense. Charlie Chaplin got his start in Chicago. Ah, is there another Chaplin out there? So I rounded up every friend I had, and we put together a company called Mid-Continent Films, Chicago being obviously in the middle of the continent. And we made two movies. One was called The Prime Time, and the other was called Living Venus. And the only positive results of those movies was my relationship with a fellow named David Friedman, who became my partner when we started to shoot what we now call splatter films. We just called them gory movies. Dave Friedman was the master of exploitation. By this time, I had a big background both in advertising and in motion picture production. I could make a wipe from one scene to another using Clorox bleach. It was stuff that the typical studios never would consider, but when you're on zero budget, brains have to be a substitute for dollars. I should say inventiveness, perhaps, rather than brains.
You know, that's one of
I've always had more inventiveness than brains.
That's one of the things. Watching the Blood Feast commentary, you talk about how you had to do so much of this stuff kind of on the fly or on the set, and I think that was one. You had an external shot of police outside a hospital, and you said something like it was just cheaper to get real police instead of hiring actors to play police because you could just they would just do it.
Well, that was always a technique. If you look at She-Devils on Wheels, we used bikers rather than actresses trying to be bikers because it was quite obvious if we wanted women to ride the big Nortons and the Hogs and the Beamers, we would have to then have stand-ins to take their place. So that was nonsensical. I mean, you look at major company films. How many of the women, or men for that matter, in these movies can actually act? Most of them simply stand there reciting lines that somebody else has written. If I'm going to have someone standing there reciting lines I have written, I'm going to pay that person as little as possible and deal in ego rather than dollars.
Makes total sense.
Simple people want the principle, really, of business. The only thing wrong with child psychology is that it doesn't work on children, but it certainly does work on adults.
Very true.
And they are my lawful prey.
So
when really at a certain point, the issue on the table at a time at which an independent motion picture either succeeded in theaters or simply was destined to wind up in somebody's film vault somewhere, what kind of motion picture might there be that the major companies would not make or could not make? And that was a simple thing to figure out, what was out there, because there was one other component to that equation, and that is that a theater would be brave enough to show, and that some theater goers would be silly enough to pay money to look at. And the genesis of this is fairly well known in the industry. I was watching a movie on television late at night in black and white with Edward G. Robinson or somebody, and the police pumped him full of bullet holes, and he died peacefully with a little splotch on his shirt. And I said, "Hold it, buddy. That isn't right," because there was no startling effect to the denouement of the story. And that started the ball rolling in a direction that became Blood Feast. And Blood Feast, I suppose, can be described as an accident of history. But as long as I caused the accident, wasn't damaged by it, and collected as the result of the accident, I can't complain about it.
And now, some tragic local news. We have a report of another murder tonight. A young girl has been found dead in Rogers Park. The body was badly mutilated. Because of these murders, police request that all women stay inside their homes after dark. If you must go out, please have someone accompany you. Keep your door locked. We'll repeat that. Police request that all women stay inside their homes after dark. If you must go out.
You said that you were watching an Edward G. Robinson film and noticed that even though the guy was shot 1,000,000 times, there really wasn't what would happen if you were shot 1,000,000 times.
Well, there again, the emphasis is on plot line, not on effect. I simply switched emphasis on that, on top of which it had to be in color to have any effectiveness. And everybody in the film industry thought we were crazy. Who was ever going to show that movie? And if you show it, who is going to show up to look at it? Are you making a movie for perverts or what? And I said, well, as a pervert, I might as well. They didn't understand the philosophy of salesmanship. If you produce anything that a specific group of people will buy, if it's legal, I'm in favor of it. If it's illegal, I'm opposed to it. And that's as basic a philosophy as anybody could have. This kind of movie was legal. There were, within the trade, certain restrictions on obscenity. There's not one four-letter word in Blood Feast. There were other restrictions on that might have applied, but there was nothing illegal in Blood Feast. Yes, we were the progenitors of some legislation, in fact, in addition to the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, imposing a new set of rules that had to do with bloodletting. But they didn't exist when we made Blood Feast. And the very fact that it was so startling had people who normally wouldn't even go to a movie saying, they didn't say, what horrible acting. Oh, my God, what a ragged pan. How could they let somebody like that stand in front of a camera? Or for that matter, behind it. They didn't say that. They said, hey, you gotta see this. I've never seen anything like this on screen. And when in Blood Feast we pull the tongue out of that girl's mouth, we, whether deliberately or inadvertently, started a new chain of thought within the entire motion picture industry.
Was that something that you realized almost immediately, or did it take...
Sure. As we opened Blood Feast, we figured, who is going to show this movie? Well, we decided to open the movie in Peoria, Illinois, saying if we die in Peoria, who will know? And the Bel Air Drive-In in Peoria has gone down along with the Egyptian pyramids as an icon of history because that's where Blood Feast opened. And from the very first night, along with horrible reviews from critics, we had extraordinary reports from people who went to see that movie. The critics said, how dare they? The moviegoers said, hey, you gotta see this. Now, which would you rather have?
Yeah.
Yes, the critics themselves, who have their own community, damned me. But the theater owners said, what's our deal? What's our deal? And here was a movie that cost nothing to make, with a cast of nobodies, with effects that generously might be described as primitive. I used department store mannequins, stuffed them with glop, but nobody had ever done this before. In comes a major company picture, and the deal is, all right, here's our deal. The first 2 weeks we get 90% of box office take. Next 2 weeks it's 50-50. From then on we may talk about a better deal. We come in with Blood Feast. We say, wait a minute, just give us 1 week at 35%. We'll see if you want to hold the picture over. If I'm a theater owner, I say, if I play to a half-empty theater with Blood Feast, I'm going to make more money. And after all, the theater business is a business. And one of my litanies is the movie business is a business. And here are movies that cost $100 million to make, and 6 months later, nobody ever heard of them. And in between, during that 6 months, they have lost maybe $20 or $30 million, and they go on to make more because they're dealing in averages. I'm not dealing in averages. I deal in picture by picture. And until we have the results of the Uh-Oh show, I've never had a loser. Nor do I plan to on this one. So how can I complain, or how can anybody complain about a track record like that? When people say to me, what's your favorite of all the movies you've made, I always answer 2000 Maniacs. And the reason I do is because it's my favorite. After we saw what the results were on Blood Feast, Dave Friedman and I looked at each other and said, holy mackerel, what if we made a decent one? And the result of that was 2000 Maniacs, which, as you know, is about a small southern town that gets even for the Civil War. And there's a case, too, where part of my immortality has a dependence on 2000 Maniacs. When we did the theme song for 2000 Maniacs, you may know that. It's called When the South's Gonna Rise Again. Mm-hmm. Not again, again. Yeah, there's an apostrophe where the middle A would be in the word again. And we had this musical group, and they were wonderful. They were two guitars and a banjo. Excellent musicians. But the problem was their lead singer was a high tenor. And I said, that's not going to work. That ain't macho. Well, meanwhile, we had this little recording studio in Orlando, and I had the entire cast and crew in there to do the Rebel Yell. That's part of the South Gonna Yeehaw! The South Gonna Rise Again. And they wanted to go to dinner. Come on, let's go. I said, okay. Since I had written that, obviously I knew the tempo, I knew the melody. It's sort of a sing-song anyway. It's my voice on the soundtrack singing that theme song from 2000 Maniacs. And to this day, when I show up at one of these horror film festivals, they'll ask me, and I will gladly say yes. And in fact, it happened in Neuchâtel, Switzerland, a couple of months ago. They asked me to sing the theme song from 2000 Maniacs. And I certainly obliged. I remember those lyrics even better than I remember the poetry of Robert Browning. There is a parallel there, I guess, somewhere. This coming weekend, I'm at something or other in Chicago. And they're going to show The Wizard of Gore, which I admit is not my favorite of all the movies I've made. But even in early emails and conversations, we've discussed, since I'm going to be there anyway, will I sing the theme song from 2000 Maniacs? You bet I will.
You probably never would have imagined all those years ago that you'd be in Switzerland singing the theme to 2000 Maniacs.
No, I never imagined I would be in Switzerland singing the theme song from 2000 Maniacs. It strained my ability, what's left of it, to communicate in French But they didn't care. Many people there were familiar with the lyrics, and everybody in the audience joined in the Yeehaw from 2000 Maniacs in Switzerland. If that isn't an indication of international success, I can't imagine what is.
There's a story you should know from 100 years ago, and 100 years we waited now to tell. Now them Yankees come along and they'll listen to this song and they'll quake in fear to hear that rebel yell. And they'll quake in fear to hear this rebel yell. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Robert E. Lee broke his musket on his knee in 1,000 pieces, shattered on the ground, but he looked up then, and he gathered up his men, and from his lips there came an awful sound. And from his lips there came an awful sound. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Stonewall took a gun and he made the Yankees run, but he took a fatal bullet in the chest. As he fell down dead, old Stonewall said, "I'm a-giving you a dying man's request." I'm giving you a dying man's request. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Jeb Stewart spurred his horse and the Yankees ran, of course, but there wasn't any powder for his gun. So he said to his boys, "Let's make a lot of noise and we'll charge again and make them Yankees run." And we'll charge again and make them Yankees run. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeehaw! Oh, the South's gonna rise again.
Herschell Gordon Lewis and the Amazing Pink Holes with The South's Gonna Rise Again.
Geen. Boy, you talk about a Renaissance man. We've just heard just some of the hats that Herschell Gordon Lewis wears. And keep in mind, when he was making these films, and he kind of alluded to it, they did everything.
Yeah.
He produced it. He wrote it. He directed it. He
Yep.
was the cameraman. He was the...
He edited it.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And why? To save on money, or they didn't have the money to hire people to do any
Right.
of that stuff. So, one-man band DIY king,
Man.
Herschell Gordon Lewis. And
Honestly,
and as you can tell, we were just sitting there in awe. In just every time he would start reading poetry, or it was just like, oh my.
after a
goodness.
while, I just left my jaw on the floor. Because one, I couldn't believe we were talking to Mr. Lewis, but then just hearing him tell these stories to us about these movies, it was just such a thrill talking to him.
And even he is excited and thrilled that he can talk about these things.
Exactly.
After being so long out of the field, but at the same time, I mean, he's got a complete other career.
Yeah, and he has a brand new movie that just came out on video, and he's actually going to be talking about it in this next break. This is our interview with Herschell Gordon Lewis, the Godfather of Gore, And just a quick note, next week, Pledge Drive starts at 89.7 The Maverick, and this time next week we will be up to our necks in Shuffle Function Radio Roulette.
That's right. The KTEL Records will be ruling the roost.
Exactly. So get ready for that. That's 1 week from today. All right. It's time to get right back into it. We're going to talk to Mr. Herschell Gordon Lewis this evening, and we're going to talk a bit about nudie cuties in this break, as well as his new film, The Uh-Oh Show. So you started making films. You were a producer, and then you started making what are termed nudie cuties too.
Yes, that was an area in which the major companies were not operational, but theaters, a specific group of theaters, certainly not Radio City Music Hall, would show these movies, and they were cheap to make. I could make one of these things in 2 or 3 days, because all they were people jumping up and down playing volleyball or on trampolines or whatever, and there was no plot line necessary. There was no talent necessary, either in front of the camera or behind it. And I had this great big old Mitchell camera, which had to get some use. In fact, I had an ancient, even then, Volkswagen bus crammed with obsolete equipment. Somebody, I think I've made this remark before, said to me, "Your camera ought to be in the Smithsonian." And I said, "Where do you think I got it?"
Do you still have that?
It was a Mitchell camera.
And do you still have that first
no,
camera?
I had that camera for years after I really ceased to be actively making movies.
Mm-hmm.
And a fellow who worked on my crew, a man named Alex Ameripour, who was an Iranian immigrant, had moved to California, pleaded with me to loan him the camera, which by that time I'd moved to Florida, and this was in the attic somewhere. I said, "Oh, sure, Alex." And I, at great expense, by the way, sent the Mitchell camera and all the lenses and all the other junk that came with it off to Alex, and that was the last I heard of it until about 8 or 10 months later, when somebody who knew us both said, "You know that Alex died." I guess my camera died with it, but it really didn't make a lot of difference, because by that time I felt my film career had gone totally into permanent eclipse. And so what difference did it make whether I had an old Mitchell camera in the attic or not? The new movie we shot digitally. One reason I made that decision was the realization that the motion picture industry is going in that direction. If you look at anything that has in it what we call CGI, which is computer generated images,
mm-hmm.
This began way back. By way back, I mean in the ancient year, let's say 2001, which might as well have been 1901, in some undersea movie adventure in which big waves came up, and they did the whole thing on a computer and then transferred the images to 35-millimeter film. And all the aliens and all the stuff that with the early Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator movies with effects, and certainly now the Transformers and movies of that sort, they're all CGI.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not shot on film. They are transferred to film afterward. But the major movement, if you go into a number of theaters today, and this number is increasing every day, while the number of theaters that are using film is decreasing every day. In the projection booth on Friday, the projectionist or some associate will hit the delete button, which gets rid of last week's movie, and he'll hit an enter button, and downloading from a satellite or somewhere comes next week's movie, and the entire thing is digital, and that's what projects onto the screen. To make the Uh-Oh Show, because I was not 100% convinced of this, we shot a scene both in 35-millimeter color and digitally there's a new camera called RED, R-E-D, which sounds more primitive than it is. The camera itself is about twice the size of a Panavision camera. Huge. We shot scenes on both cameras, projected them onto a theatrical screen, not onto a TV monitor. And the digital image was sharper and more colorful throughout. And so I felt somewhat secure. There was another advantage in shooting digitally now.
Mm-hmm.
In the ancient days, if I was going to shoot a scene, even as basic, as primitive as my movies were, I would have to cut to a close-up somewhere in the shot, which meant I'd shoot it once with a long shot or a two-shot or whatever, and then come back and shoot it again with a tighter lens for the close-up, which meant if your arm is up in the air and then, on the long shot, it better be up in the air as I come back for the closer shot so I can match them up. That can't happen if you're shooting with two cameras simultaneously. On film, you're exposing two pieces of film simultaneously, knowing as you do you're going to have to throw away one of them. If you're shooting digitally, so what? You use what you want. You can either reuse the rest, and throwing away a piece of tape is in no way as expensive as throwing away a piece of film. So there's really a fiduciary benefit in shooting digitally.
Sure.
And I was very pleased with the results. Now, I am not pleased, and I have no problem publicizing this, with a distribution pattern that's being set up for the Uh-Oh show. And that may be my fault, because in the agreements under which we made the Uh-Oh show, which was originally titled Grim Fairy Tales, as you may know.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I changed the title, I was getting inquiries from the trade saying, are these live-action versions of the ancient Grimm Brothers German fairy tales? No, they're not. But my agreement, I wrote the script under contract, and I directed the movie under contract. But I specifically have been excluded from distribution. And the technique of distribution of the Uh-Oh show has me extraordinarily annoyed. And I have no problem at all publicizing that because I've said that publicly. Mm-hmm. And maybe I can spur the producer into making a better deal than he seems to be making for distribution of what I think is the most viewable movie I've ever made.
So you're very happy with the outcome?
Yes, I am, considering two things. One, budget, and two, where we are generationally in the area of splatter films. If you look at some of the more recent splatter films, Scream number 37 or something of that sort, mm-hmm. or the House on Elm Street number 1286, you get the feeling you're looking at the same movie over and over again. Mm-hmm. Some girl is sitting there and she's suddenly terrified and the phone rings and some of the window smashes and she's grabbed by the neck and dismembered, but it's the same movie. With the Uh-Oh show, no one can claim that because it's a joke. And I make it very clear from the beginning of this movie through the end that the whole thing is a joke. And the movie ends, in fact, with some of the people who have been torn to bits dancing around the stage. How can that be? On top of which, if I were to sever your left arm at the shoulder with a hatchet or an axe or a radial saw, you would either bleed to death or die of shock or a combination of both. Not in the Uh-Oh show. You're annoyed. Up comes this lunatic master of ceremonies. Oh, you want to come back next week and try again? You'll still get all these prizes. And holding your severed arm in the other hand. You say, well, will you put this thing back on? Yeah, we'll put it back on. Come on back next week and you get all these. All right. How is that possible? And the next scene, as you may know in the Uh-Oh show, is a workman in a filthy costume with a hammer and a great big spike, and he's nailing this shriveled black arm onto this girl's shoulder, and she's standing there annoyed, and she says, wait a minute, that's not my arm, and you're putting it on backward. And he says, hey, lady, this ain't the Mayo Clinic. Now, at that point, if the audience doesn't understand that the whole thing is a gag, they should not be looking at this movie. And that's why I'm very pleased with the result. For the amount of money we spent on it, we have a lot of movies there. And yes, it is certainly it's primitive from the viewpoint of plot line, but it is not primitive from the viewpoint either of production value or of taking this entire category this genre of motion picture one step in an oblique direction.
Has working in digital and in this experience inspired you to maybe do another film?
Very possible. If you want to produce one, I'll be glad to direct it. I've got a script called Mr. Bruce and the Gore Machine.
Well, I just bought a lottery ticket, so who knows?
All right, let me know if you win.
We are the Hellcats nobody likes, man-eaters on motorbike. We own this road, so you better get lost. When you hear the roar of our cutout exhaust, fuck off or you'll find that you have blown your mind. Get off the road. Get off the road. We know a man is made out of clay. Be shooting clay pigeons today. Get off the road before we have crossed, or you'll like to get your rear end tossed. Gonna be uptight, we're riding here tonight. Get off the road. Get off the road. We are the Hellcats nobody likes, man-eaters on motorbikes. We own this road, so you better get lost. When you hear the roar of our cutout exhaust, bug off or you'll find that you have blown your mind. Get off the road. Get off the road. We know a man is made out of clay. Be shooting clay pigeons today. Get off the road before we have crossed, or you like to get your rear end tossed. Gonna be uptight, we're riding here tonight. Get off the road. Get off the road.
smoking music from
no
Blast
kidding.
Off Girls. That was Noise on 89.7 The Maverick. And before that, the theme from She Devils on Wheels, Get Off the Road. Music from Herschell Gordon Lewis movies. We're talking to Herschell Gordon Lewis tonight. It's been a thrill, and I hope that that thrill is conveyed in our gleeful fan kid reactions.
Stammering questions of, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to Herschell Gordon Lewis.
Seriously. I mean,
that we are on display.
Yeah, he's it's like, as far as horror films are concerned, that, exploitation movies, he's right up there. He's one of my favorites. And if you've never seen Herschell Gordon Lewis movies, Blood Feast is a great place to start, but I know that a good chunk, if not everything that's known to be out there, other than like Girls or Show and Blood Feast 2 are available from Something Weird Video.
Yeah, it really search these films out, and especially it's Halloween time. So, and we're such big. We don't have a lot of time, but we're such big film fanatics. Just want to remind you about Grind Foo Cinema, which is October 29th. It's our last one of the season. We're showing The Exorcist and The Shining at 7 p.m. It all kicks off, as well as cake, and you're all invited.
Yeah, and it's completely free.
Yeah, and we have all the information you need at our blog, shufflefunction.blogspot.com, but we hope to see you there.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good time. All right, we're going to get right back into our interview with Mr. Herschell Gordon Lewis, the Godfather of Gore, and in this section we're going to be talking a bit about how he feels about his place in film history. We're going to talk a little bit about his very successful career in copywriting and direct marketing. And you're hearing it on 89.7 The Maverick.
As you know, there's a new documentary, I call it a schlockumentary, titled The Godfather of Gore.
Oh, yes, we just recently
we
saw
both
that.
have just watched it, yeah.
Oh, that's Jimmy Maslin's movie. Yeah, it's interminable in a sense, and it emphasizes, I think, aspects of my career I just as soon downplay. On the other hand, how can I apologize when I'm having the world's best time, enjoying a lifestyle I never dreamed of when I was teaching English literature? and I can go back to those days and reminisce rather than being sunk in it. A few weeks ago, I gave a speech to the local Rotary Club because I was talking to, really, again, out of character. I was talking to their program director, and she said something about having read a poem of Robert Browning, and I said, "You're on my turf." And I began to recite some of the Browning poems. "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his plan." Who said, oh, and on we go. And I said, wait, how can I still remember this all these years later? And she said, oh, you got to give us a session here. I said, can you imagine Rotary Club members being interested in Victorian poetry? She said, yes. Oh, by gum. But what really astounded me was that my Alzheimer's seems to be in enough remission that I was able to remember this poetry without notes. From all I certainly wasn't going to dig out a book of Browning's poetry to recite to the Rotary Club. And at the end of this, whether politely or enthusiastically, they applauded. And I said, my gosh, there was some value to those years after all.
Well, I think it's absurd, and I hate to even use absurd as it sounds that you were a teacher. I mean, it shows in your films just on the fact that your love for words, in just that you wrote all the copy for them, you wrote the songs. I mean, it makes sense, as goofy as it sounds when you say what you did for a living before you made these. I think it's pretty important that you did.
Well, as you know, I have another career.
Yes.
And my other career, in fact, the 4th edition of my best-selling book was published last week. So I'm still out there plugging away. The book is titled On the Art of Writing Copy. And until things like Google exposed me, the worlds did not collide.
Right.
Every now and then I'd be giving a speech on marketing, In fact, again, last week I was a speaker for the Direct Marketing Association at their annual conference, which this year was in Boston. And I was in between sessions signing still photographs from the movie end. And it really is funny.
Oh.
But that didn't happen until the two strange careers, and each one is, I guess, strange, smashed into each other thanks to the Internet. Nobody has any privacy anymore.
Yeah.
You are at the mercy of Google and Bing, and you better be out there ready to answer questions.
What do you think it is that people are seeing in your films?
There's things that I don't take the industry seriously, or the movies I've made seriously.
Okay.
Some of these producers and directors, they don't make movies, they give birth. And if you criticize their movies, they say, you're attacking my child. I've never taken that position. I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it today, and I'll probably say it tomorrow, assuming the sun rises on me tomorrow, that it's a business, and the wonderful aspect of my participation in this business is I have had and am having a good time. Who else can make that kind of a claim?
Yeah.
I love that you feel that way, because I have such a good time when I see your films. Maybe that's what comes through, and that's what ties people to them. But
I hope that's it. That would be wonderful for both of us.
Oh, way up there on Moonshine Mountain, that's where we make white lightning, 14 jugs without no counting. That's how we taste white lightning. Mix up corn with some old pork fat, that's how you begin. White lightning, add all the innards of an old polecat, that's what's in. White lightning, white lightning, white lightning. It's a drink you can't sip through a straw. Age 1 day and bottled in quarts, that's why we choose white lightning. Good for chilblains, hives, and warts, that's how we use white lightning. You make your mash and it starts to boil, no trouble with white lightning. Works twice as good as castor oil. See double with white lightning, white lightning, white lightning. It's a drink you can't sip through a straw. Good for cleaning rifle bores, lead don't hurt. White lightning, good for oiling outhouse doors. Just a squirt of lightning. When Samson knocked down all them walls, he used a jug of lightning. Gabriel blew his trumpet calls after a slug of lightning. White lightning, white lightning. It's a drink you can't sip through a straw. It's a drink you can't sip through a straw.
The amazing Herschell Gordon Lewis.
Singing White Moonshine Mountain.
Yeah, the theme to Moonshine Mountain. Man.
Try to get around and not have that stuck in your head for a little while.
No
I'm going to be
kidding.
going White Lightning all day.
It was a real thrill. Mr. Lewis, if you're listening tonight, thank you so much for your patience and indulging us as we grill you with a million questions. You've probably been asked a million times before, but I can never hear the answers enough.
Well, and as we said at the top of the hour, you ever need an excuse to have a radio show, this is it. You get to talk to people who are like your heroes.
No fooling.
And so, yeah, I want to just extend another thank you to Mr. Lewis and encourage you guys to seek out his movies.
Yeah.
They are so much fun, and it's the time of year to watch them.
If you were going to list... it's hard for me to pick a favorite. Blood Feast is my favorite.
It's my favorite.
Blood Feast is my favorite.
I can quote so much of it, too.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Okay, quote off.
Oh, you're going to win this.
Yes, Mrs. Fremont, I do cater to unusual affairs.
However,
what do you consider to be unusual?
I can limp better than you, though.
Yeah, but that you just naturally limp.
I know.
So no fair. No fair working with the gifts God gave you.
But Gorgo Girls is awesome.
Yeah.
She Devils on Wheels is awesome.
If you're looking for non-horror stuff, Blast Off Girls is a lot of fun.
I know, because that's
for the hell of it is a lot of fun.
It's a whole nother scene. It's like a time capsule with the go-go stuff going on that's in some of these films.
And and you know, Blast Off Girls, the music is fantastic. That's one of the things that's so surprising when you watch these movies is, you know, a lot of times the music is just freaking great.
Yeah, without a doubt. So
the theme to the Suburban Roulette right there just surprised me. First time I heard it, I'm like, wow, this is really catchy, jazzy stuff.
You guys got to track them down.
Seriously.
And boy, it would please us to no end if this was your introduction to Herschell Gordon Lewis and you, too, became a fan of for decades and decades.
No kidding. Well, we have about a minute left.
Tim.
Just remember, next week, Pledge Drive starts right here on 89.7 The Maverick. This time next week, we'll be wrapping up what will hopefully be a really cool round of Shuffle Function Radio Roulette. And
Cross
then
our
don't
fingers.
forget, 2 days after that, October 29th at 7 p.m., Weeking 220 Auditorium for free. It's Grind Fu Cinema. We're showing The Exorcist and The Shining, and there's cake.
There is cake, and it's not just any cake either.
No, it's Grind Fu cake.
Our cakes are legendary. So, as we're fond of saying, come for the movies, stay for the cake.
That's exactly right. And, you know, if you have any questions, comments, insults, or haikus, send them to shufflefunction@hotmail.com. Shufflefunction, all one word, Shufflefunction. Pop music as pornography.
This music is making me nervous.
Well, don't worry. In 10 seconds, Gary will be here to make it all better.